Well, Tim, lovely to have you with us.
A delight to be with you.
How in Melbourne?
Yeah, well, in Melbourne, we've got Sydney weather. It's pouring with rain, and we're blaming you for it. So, not a nice day.
Well, look, I think living in New South Wales is we got broad shoulders.
It's true. You know, the embarrassing thing about living in Melbourne, Martin, is we try to get Sydney's attention. We throw cheap shots at you all the time because once we were a great city. I do it. And even the thing that really upsets me, even when I do it, Martin, is Sydney people just don't take the bait. It's like we don't even matter. That's even more infuriating.
I think that's very observant from we don't really care. I mean, if you're living in God's country, what matter does it? So, but before we stop continue to bash cities, maybe what we need to get back to is kind of the theme of tonight. And Tim, it's great to have you with us, and thank you very much for coming and being prepared to spend some time. It's the first experience of having an interview where I'm here with the congregation and you in Melbourne. But isn't that wonderful that in fact we're able to do just that?
Absolutely. And Zoom for me broke through a mental block. I thought I would only see my international friends if I could travel to their country, go to a conference. And suddenly I realized, thanks to Zoom, I can travel the world all the time, which I've been doing through COVID. So here it's just traveling to Sydney. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, that's great to have you. Now, I suppose I want to start. I've been doing a bit of reading, so I've got your book, and in fact I've got your other book as well, The Cost of Compassion. So we'll talk about both of those a little bit later. But I want to start with A Lot with a Little. So where does the title come from?
It comes from my mother. She's 91 now and still very much alive. Still rings me every second day to tell me that I did something wrong or I should have said something else in the media. I'm not sure she does that to her other son, but I seem to often cop it. But look, I reflect on how she married my father. She was a psych student at university, Melbourne University, in the late 1940s. Did a psych test on my father, found that he had the highest IQ of anyone, and said, right, I really want to marry him, which she did. And but she said to me later in life, your dad, who was a wonderful man, was very unambitious. He was a teacher, a wonderful teacher, but he never wanted promotions. He could have been a school principal, but never wanted to do it. And she said, you know, your father, he had the lot, but you might say, Tim, he did a little with the lot. You and I, when it comes to IQ, we've only got a little, but we've done a lot. So it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but the title of the book comes from that.
So in the book, though, you say that the influence that your dad had on you was profound. Not only in terms of your personal development and in terms of your connection with social justice, but also in your faith walk. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The wonderful thing about Dad not being ambitious in a career sense was that he was really a very present father and a born teacher. So we really benefited enormously from his teaching. My mother was a teacher too, actually, from both of their teaching. But Dad had this remarkable conversion. He'd grown up in a family where they didn't go to church. He had been secretly baptized a Catholic, but he didn't even know that as a child, because his mother actually had a Catholic faith, but wasn't allowed to practice it. My grandfather was totally against religion. So Dad grew up totally a-religious. He wanted to play cricket with the best cricket team, which happened to be the Presbyterian cricket team in Ascot Vale. And to play with the cricket team, you had to go to church once a month. And he went and he got dramatically converted. And in some ways, you might say his conversion is a testimony to the power of sport, but it was a conversion that profoundly shaped me, our whole family, because we grew up, you know, with Christian faith and all the stories. He literally had that dramatic night and day experience of not having any understanding of God, of Jesus, of love, of grace. And it really overwhelmed him and changed his life. He after the war, went to Melbourne Bible Institute and went to university, did Greek. He taught Greek, New Testament Greek at Melbourne Bible Institute for many years, as well as being a secondary school teacher. And seeing my father praying on his knees each morning, reading from his Greek New Testament, and alive with that overwhelming sense of grace, it had a profound shaping on my life, because I realized that my experience of God, sometimes I would say almost a bit mediated to me through my father. My conversion story growing up in a Christian family wasn't dramatic. It was always there. But seeing it in my father really was the foundation for my faith.
So in terms of that, though, that's the connection in faith. What made you so connected to things of social justice?
Yeah, so this was a journey. I was, I think, going to be an evangelist. I was doing open air preaching at 16 and 17. My brother Peter was too. When people say to me, how come your brother was so good on his feet in question time in Parliament? I say, open air preaching. You actually learned to respond to interjections and be able to convey a message. So for me, it was much more a focus on seeing people who were lost saved. And the really troubling experience for me was at university. We had a white South African evangelist. I was president of the Evangelical Union at Monash, got him to come. His name was Michael Cassidy. And it was the mid-70s. And he said something that shocked me, particularly saying it in front of a non-Christian audience. This was an evangelistic meeting. He said, the people in South Africa who devised apartheid were church-attending, Bible-reading, prayerful Christians. The people who maintain apartheid, this is the late 70s, church-attending, Bible-reading Christians. And I knew apartheid was wrong, that it relegated, in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28 terms, where male and female are all equal in Christ, slave and free are equal, Jew and Gentile, that it absolutely profoundly contradicted Christian faith. And it rather shattered my theology. My theology then was, if I can get enough people saved as an evangelist, then all the problems in the world will be set right, because Christians will always do the right thing. And here was a South African saying, actually, Christians are maintaining apartheid. And that was really my journey to start reading the Old Testament prophets from the Hebrew scriptures, to understand that Jesus and Paul stood in the shoes of those prophets, that Jesus stood with those who were vulnerable, who were victims. He himself was a victim of Roman militarism. And Jesus's preaching of the kingdom of God had that prophetic dimension, that human life could be truly human for all. That the reign of God includes that dimension of salvation, not just my soul being saved and me booking my ticket to the great U2 concert in the sky and saying, I'm saved, I'm out of here. So really, that was the journey for me to then go and study theology and to think about the wider dimensions of salvation, of gospel, of faith in Jesus. That's really how it happened for me, Martin.
And obviously from that, you've been involved in lots of different organizations. You've been involved in World Vision and with Mica and with Urban Seed and with all of these organizations. Out of all of those organizations, what is kind of struck you as most important at this point in time?
So the nice thing is that I've worked domestically with a lot of the poor. So in St Kilda, I went as a minister. I had to set up a legal practice in the church because the St Kilda Baptist Church only had 7 or 8 elderly members and couldn't pay me. So I worked as a lawyer, and then the church grew. We dealt with sex workers, mentally ill, homeless people. And I learned domestically to take the Bible seriously. I remember reading Isaiah 65, and it said, they shall build houses and live in them. No longer shall they build houses and others live in them. And the big issue in St Kilda was new money, it's called gentrification, discovering St Kilda and forcing out a lot of the long-term poor and huge rises in homelessness. That led me to stand for council, to become mayor of St Kilda, to be the first council to put ratepayers' dollars into what we call social housing for long-term St Kilda poor who were being forced out. And that came, and I cited in my mayoral inaugural address, Isaiah. I could see some looks on people's faces. Uh-oh, we've got a nutter of a Baptist minister quoting the Bible at us. But that was really a profound moment. Urban Seed was in Collins Street, the heroin crisis, people dying, far more people dying of heroin overdoses when I went to Collins Street Baptist Church than in car crashes, and setting up Urban Seed to respond to the heroin crisis. And then with World Vision, it was a really interesting eye-opener for me. I really thought, we have the solution, it's called money. They have a problem, it's called poverty. If we raise enough money and transfer it to them, they won't have so much of a problem. And I discovered in World Vision work that actually it is a two-way street, that we have a problem in Australia. It may not be absolute poverty, but it's relational poverty and spiritual poverty. And it's that loss of meaning, profound loss of meaning. And in poor countries where people were in terrible poverty, I'll never romanticize poverty, they had song and dance and connection to elders and story and a richness that I thought we often lacked in Australia. So each part of that journey, those St Kilda, Urban Seed, World Vision days, have been an exploration of going deeper in understanding my faith.
I suppose the question that I've got from that is that at the moment with our churches, we seem to be declining in the Western church. And so in a sense, the impact that we can make in the wider world in terms of social justice and social activism doesn't seem to be happening quite as much, and it gives us as much opportunity. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think the tragic trashing of brand church, particularly with royal commissions into sexual abuse and manifest failures institutionally, has allowed secular Australia to sort of claim the values that I think come from Jesus were sort of all invented in the Enlightenment. And that secular hostility that has been built up with some of the failures of the church has rendered the church to be in quite a weak position. It's why I love writers like Tom Holland, who wrote a book, Dominion. He's not even a Christian, but he just shows how human rights and the advance for social justice really is the project of the church over the last 2,000 years. That the Enlightenment values didn't just pop out of nowhere. They came with the example of Jesus and God who becomes man in Jesus. So I think we're now, with the secular hostility that is very, very obvious in Australia, in a humbling time to actually go back and remind ourselves that It's actually about love. We are saved by faith alone, but it's faith in Jesus. And Jesus was the one who sided with the vulnerable, with the victims, who taught love of enemies, who defines the content of that social justice. So I think the renewal job for the church is to get back to Jesus and to discover that we took some side roads when we became maybe too institutionally powerful, maybe too arrogant, not listening to the least, particularly children in the Royal Commission. And that's a humbling journey that the church has to go on at the moment, Martin.
I suppose my concern with that journey is just, it seems as if the generation that we're trying to hit is really doing it themselves. I mean, when we see the young people doing the climate change walks, and we're seeing them talking about fossil fuels, and we're talking about those kind of things, they seem to be saying, well, we're not going to actually follow our parents and our grandparents because it seems they're not going to do anything anyway. And almost to the point where they're not getting them back into church at all. So how do we get them to come back so that there's actually that spiritual underpinning?
Yeah, I think that young people are still very attracted to Jesus. I think the new word for religion is the word spirituality. I think it's just actually a remake of the old world, but religion is on the nose. Spirituality, they're very, very open to. When I talk to young people, most will say, I don't believe that life just came out of matter, that we are alone in the universe, that there is something that is deeper. Now, I think some of their doing something the church should join with and encourage and affirm. The church too often wags a finger and says you're young, and if you only shut up long enough and listen to us, you would know all the answers. That's what I mean by the arrogance. We actually need to affirm those instincts, that spirituality, that desire to do something, because I think it actually has a lot more to do with Jesus, just like your opening song was saying.
Thank you. Well, Tim, stay with us. We're just going to take a short break and just listen to another piece of music. This one was also by another South African, because we've talked about South Africans before. This one's called Israel Horton, and he's written a song called Others, which I think is quite a good song for us to look at. Let's listen to it together. I want to continue our little conversation, and I want to particularly talk about your book, The Cost of Compassion. It was interesting in that particular song, there's a line where Israel says that he's scared that we've stopped loving. And I think it's an interesting question in terms of that, because you've written the book, The Cost of Compassion. And from me, the focus of it is to say that we're actually all compassionate. We all want a better world, but we're not quite sure how we're going to get that. And also, we're not sure about the cost that we've got to pay to do so. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, so I wrote that book because you won't find anyone who puts their hand up and says, no need to be compassionate. Everybody signs up in their own way to say. So then you raise the question, what's the challenge here? Why are there so many blocks to our compassion? And I explore some of those in terms of fear, in terms of sometimes that compassion fatigue, that too much will be asked of us, which is what the cost then of compassion is, and reflect on that in the light of Jesus. And his compassion didn't know when to stop. It went right over the top, even to loving on the cross and the thief who's dying with him. And that example for me is what the world desperately needs when we draw circles around what costs we're prepared to pay and why we see others as objects of fear or as enemy. As we know, social media has only amplified this, where people will talk only about their victimhood and who's hurt them and who their enemies are, algorithms sorting them into that way of thinking. That evaporates compassion. So the Christian church really needs to be an antidote to that sort of thinking. So that's why I wrote that book, Martin.
It's really such an accessible book. It's such a, I mean, not just in terms of size, but in terms of what it contains. I was able to read it through. I've only got it a few days ago, but it's really quite interesting in terms of the concept of what compassion looks like and what the church can do. I'm looking out over a congregation at the moment, and if I had to be able to say to them, what can they do, actually get involved in, what can that be?
Yeah, I think the first song was absolutely wonderful. It showed small acts from giving a hug to big acts like adopting or fostering. And that message, do something, I think is a really powerful message. Your second song really was picking up Matthew chapter 25. And the surprise of people saying, but Lord, we didn't know it was you that was naked or hungry, if only. And Jesus saying, yeah, that was me. That person in prison, yes, that was me. And the beautiful thing about that is I think it is an image of fraternity. We know the French Revolution had equality, liberty, and fraternity. Equality is what the left of politics always emphasizes. Liberty or freedom's what the right always emphasizes. You actually need both. But I think Christian faith really brings fraternity. Fraternity is an association. We're used to it with a legal fraternity. If you're not a lawyer, you can't be in a legal fraternity. It's very exclusive. A medical fraternity, if you're not a doctor, you can't be in the medical fraternity. It's an association that's exclusive. What Jesus does in Matthew 25 is he says, actually, we have made an inclusive fraternity. It includes hungry and homeless, because yes, that's me. It includes those in prison. And I think the real mission of the church is to keep expanding that fraternity, to say, whoever God brings across my path that I can communicate, I can see the image of God in you. Even my enemies, this is what distresses me so much about Jesus. If Jesus had been a bit more practical, he could have said, avoid your enemies. That would be useful advice. If he wanted to stretch me a bit, he could have said, well, try and tolerate your enemies. That would be harder. I find it absolutely gobsmacking. He said, love your enemies. Because Jesus literally believed, even my enemy carries the image of God. And therefore, I can't do violence to that person. I need to actually love them. And this just expands the notion of fraternity, that none of us want in our fraternity someone who's our enemy. Jesus expanded the boundaries, made it much more inclusive. So to answer your question, it is from very small things, a smile, a hello, stopping to talk to someone who's homeless and offering them to buy them a cup of coffee, to whatever else that God sets for you to do.
Now, in terms of what God seems to have set for you to do, you've been involved in a number of different organizations, one of which is Mica Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about Mica?
Yeah, so Mica Australia is based on the verse from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? It's one of the best question and answers, I think, in the Bible, because it's so simple. I think every Christian really asks that question. What does God require of me? The answer, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. So Mica is the faith-based Christian organization, Salvation Army, Baptist World Aid, Uniting Church Aid, Uniting Care, World Vision, that come together to say, let's focus on the world's vulnerable beyond our shores. It has a powerful voice because nearly 2/3 of the giving to international development agencies in Australia come through Christian faith-based giving. some $700 million. Christians who get a bad press all the time, because there is a lot of hostility toward us, actually are remarkably generous. So some 700 million going through those agencies out of pockets of Christians, and Christians are, well, church attending, less than 10% of the population. So Mica says we Christian faith-based organizations have skin in the game. Let's say to our government, raise aid. So last year during COVID, we ran a campaign, End COVID for All. This was a Mica campaign. We brought everyone on board, from Hillsong to Islamic Relief to opinions from the chair of the board of Woolworths, to health professionals, a full page of 200 organisations in the Fin Review saying, please, Australia, look after our immediate neighbours who have fragile health systems, who have been really hurt by the economic shutdown, particularly in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia. And we saw out of this campaign, the Australian government increase aid with $1 billion of new money, which is the first increase in aid. It had been cut back in the 2014 budget by nearly $2 billion, and it was only ever getting cut. The first increase we've seen. And it was a joy for me to go to Canberra before Christmas, and I was there again last week, thanking our government for hearing the cries of people in our region, East Timor, the Pacific, Southeast Asia. So that has been a result of the Mica campaign. So yeah, very, very pleased to talk about that, Martin.
And I suppose, I mean, that's the whole thing, isn't it, with the whole COVID reality, that we might be able to do it for ourselves as a first world country who can afford vaccines and all that kind of thing. But in fact, that's not necessarily the case for our neighbours.
That's absolutely right. And what we have seen and were seeing was vaccine nationalism, where the wealthy countries with sharp elbows were pushing the poorer nations out of the way and snapping up and buying all the supplies and rolling it out first. And, you know, the moral question that Christians should be asking, which Mica asked, is why do healthy, fit young Australians get the vaccine, or Americans or Canadians, before frontline workers in African nations, in Indonesia, who have very fragile health systems? If we believe all carry the image of God, from which we get the ideas of universal human rights, a much more secular way of putting that same idea, then we will oppose vaccine nationalism. And that's what Mica has been doing.
And in many ways, I think if COVID's taught us anything, is that we're a global village. And so what happens to one actually affects all.
It's been quite extraordinary, hasn't it? Invisible virus has shown us that we are all biologically connected, utterly interdependent, utterly vulnerable. So with COVID now rushing through PNG, the hospital in Cairns, with so many sick being brought in, is on orange alert. We know that the virus doesn't end for any of us until it ends for all of us. So we said with the Mica campaign, our borders might have to be shut, but our hearts aren't shut. We can increase aid. We can overcome it. And I'm really pleased to say the Australian government has really stepped up here, much more than lots of other first world nations, which makes me very proud. And I think it's a great tribute to the Christian voice on this issue.
Look, Tim, thank you very much for sharing with us this evening. And I think it's been really enlightening with us in terms of both faith and life. Can you leave us with one last thought that you'd want to share with us for the church in Australia today?
Yeah, I think the church in Australia needs to have confidence that the gospel is what Australia needs, and not to lose that confidence. When I think of how important the church is, we might say our numbers are dwindling, but there are very few groups in Australia now that meet each week, listen to a morally serious, spiritually serious topic on a sermon, pass around an offering plate, organise not just for themselves, but for the needs in their community. This is quite stunning still in Australia. So I think the church should be encouraged and believe that the gospel is still the good news for this nation.
Tim, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for all the work that you've done over the years in all these organizations, and which you continue to do at the moment. Can we give a hand in the...
Thank you. Absolute delight to be with you.
It's lovely. Now, one other thing that we want to do as well is to talk about the books. If you, we've got the two books here, A Lot with a Little, not A Little with a Lot. That was his dad, but this is Tim. So that's the one. And the other one is called The Cost of Compassion. And we have them, if you'd like to order those, we've got, we can get orders out as well. And you can order them for tonight. I want to just talk a little bit about, or just do a little bit of a reflection. And when I was thinking about tonight, about kind of a Bible passage that works for me, the Bible passage that worked for me is called James 1. It's in James, the letter of James, which is interesting. It's an interesting letter because it's a letter that was rejected by some of the theologians. And the reason why they rejected it is because they felt that it would distract from Jesus. But you know, I don't think that, in fact, as we've heard with Tim, is that doing the stuff of God doesn't distract from Jesus. It actually lives Jesus out. And that's exactly what's in this passage. In verse 22, he says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like." Isn't that fantastic? I love that. So, I mean, in fact, some of us would like to forget what we look like, but that's a different thing. This is actually forgetting what we look like. "But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do." See, I think that one of the things that too often happen, particularly in evangelicalism, is that what we were doing is trying getting to people into heaven. And there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is we've still got to live on earth. And while we live on earth, we need to live on earth in anticipation of that which is in heaven. And for me, that's the concept of these organizations like World Vision, Mica, and all these other organizations, that it's seeking to encourage us to do that. But as that first song did, it said maybe we have to do it in just small ways, in a hug, in a smile, in actually just inquiring how the other person is, in the opportunity to share with each other. It's in all of those kinds of things that where we can look at ourselves and see the reflection of Christ. And in seeing the reflection of Christ, we may go out and seek to live as Christ would have us live. We're going to reflect on that now with just a piece of music, some pictures, and the pictures that you're going to see and the questions that will come with it. The pictures actually come from World Vision, from the World Vision site, and the questions actually come as part of the understanding of this book here, The Cost of Compassion. So let's listen, let's think about it, let's reflect on what we've heard tonight.